In the summer of 2024, a forensic geologist named Ethan Clark stepped down from the stage at a research conference and checked his phone. There was a missed call from a man named Victor Hale, and Victor wasn't the kind of person who called without a reason. Ethan called him back immediately. Victor answered and said just 3 words. "Grayson is gone." Ethan froze. He knew exactly what that meant. Another piece had surfaced. Years earlier, Victor and a group of his former colleagues had worked together in a shadowy, government-adjacent organization. Over time, a pattern had formed. Every time one of those men died, something would appear from their estate. Documents, artifacts, strange materials, always accompanied by the same instruction: send everything to Victor Hale. Now, Grayson had passed away. Victor told Ethan that the executor had already recovered 2 items, a hand-drawn map and a document written in an unfamiliar alphabet no one could decipher. But to understand any of it, the map, the coded writing, why the belongings of dead men kept arriving at one aging man's doorstep, you have to go back nearly 60 years, to a decaying island in the East River. The man who set everything in motion was named Arthur Bennett. Arthur and Victor had grown up together in Queens, New York. After returning from military service overseas, Arthur needed work, and Victor helped bring him into that same mysterious agency. Officially, no one ever described what the organization actually did, but it operated quietly between 1962 and 1995. Arthur was also a trained physician. That detail would matter later. In 1969, Arthur and Victor took a trip up the East River to explore Ravenskeep Island, a crumbling fortress abandoned after a massive explosion years earlier. Debris littered the shoreline in the surrounding waters. The 2 men developed a habit of diving there, recovering old military relics and selling them back in the city for extra cash. During one of those dives, Victor discovered several decorative stone pieces blown loose from the fortress walls. He handed them to Arthur, thinking his wife, an avid gardener, might like them. She placed them around their garden as simple decorations. About a year later, their young son, just 5 years old, was playing outside. He grabbed one of the stone ornaments, twisted its top, and unexpectedly, it opened. Inside was a small clay cylinder about 4 inches long, sealed with beeswax. That detail would become important. Inside the tube were 2 pieces of parchment covered with symbols Arthur had never seen before, and a small brass navigation instrument. Etched on one of its metal plates was a single word: Aurelia, an ancient name once used for the lands of North America. And just like that, everything changed. Arthur spent the next 25 years chasing the mystery. He traveled across Europe. In Florence, he managed to acquire a rare manuscript from the descendant of one of its original authors, a document known as the Valentini Codex. It was no ordinary record. It was an encrypted archive describing a 12th century expedition, one carried out by a powerful medieval order long believed to have vanished. Ethan had once dated a block of concrete under a microscope and narrowed down a time of death to within months. That's the level he worked at. He had assisted federal teams after a major national tragedy. He was a licensed professional geologist, someone who could be called into court and defend every conclusion under oath. Facts mattered to him. Evidence mattered. Which is why his work on a controversial artifact caught so many people off guard. For years, Ethan had studied the Ravenstone Tablet, a strange slab of rock discovered in Wisconsin, covered in what appeared to be medieval inscriptions. Most historians dismissed it as a hoax. Ethan didn't. His geological analysis told a different story. The mineral weathering on the carved surface was more than 2 centuries old, dating back to a time before any recorded European settlement in that region. And then there were the numbers. Hidden in the carving patterns, the rune counts, even the structural layout, Ethan found recurring sequences, 8 and 22. They weren't random, they were symbolic. 8 bones in the skull, 14 in the face, 22 total. These were sacred numerical patterns historically linked to an ancient order, numbers embedded deliberately into their work. At the time, Ethan didn't realize just how important that discovery would become. In 2018, Ethan and Lena were driving back from the Atlantic coast when they decided to make a stop and visit Victor Hale. Ethan stepped into Victor's kitchen and immediately noticed a photograph on the wall. Victor was standing beside Daniel Mercer, a well-known figure from a popular treasure-hunting TV series. Victor casually pulled out a contract the production team had left behind. Ethan read it, then looked up and said, "This is worthless." The deal demanded full access to Victor's artifacts, documents, everything. In return, they offered exposure, fame, nothing more. Ethan shook his head. "Don't sign that," he said. "Sign mine instead." Right there, in that kitchen, they made an agreement. Then Victor reached over and handed Ethan a worn manila envelope. Inside was a letter from Elena Bennett, the daughter of Arthur Bennett. She explained that back in 1997, her father had secretly given her a packet of materials with strict instructions. "Keep this safe. If anything happens to me, send it to Victor, not your mother." Arthur had feared his wife would destroy everything. When he passed away in 2001, Elena simply forgot. For 17 years, the packet sat untouched, until 2018, when she rediscovered it and finally sent it to Victor. Beneath her letter was a single sheet of paper. The moment Ethan saw it, he understood. It was page 1 of the Valentini Codex, the page Arthur had claimed was missing, the page that contained the cipher key, the one piece needed to unlock everything. Also included was a letter from Arthur himself. In it, he wrote that Victor had been his closest friend since childhood, the only one who truly believed in his work. And because Victor was the youngest among them, Arthur had trusted he would outlive the rest. He had been right. After nearly 20 years, the final piece had arrived. The safe finally had its combination. With the cipher in hand, Ethan and Victor began decoding the collection. Among the materials were references to a set of journals known as the Halifax manuscripts, passed down through generations before eventually reaching Ethan through a separate chain. What they described was staggering. These weren't vague legends, they were detailed records. One entry dated 1772 described a secret gathering of dozens of influential figures, members of a powerful brotherhood, alongside laborers and servants. Among those present was a prominent American statesman who reminded the group that their loyalty to the brotherhood outweighed all political divisions. The purpose of the meeting? To organize an expedition north to retrieve hidden treasure from Nova Scotia. They didn't leave that location for 2 full days. Ethan sat there in the wilderness, carefully going through everything inside the jar. At first, it didn't look like much, just sand and a few small dark objects. But as he cleaned them off, the shapes became clear. Coins. Crosses. Templar. Then he found the real object, a long scroll wrapped inside a neatly folded designer napkin. Ethan examined the napkin first. The pattern and material weren't random. He traced it back to a specific textile artist who had only been active between 1951 and 1958. The paper itself, even older. He identified it as stock produced in the 1880s from a paper mill in the American Midwest, and the jar, a mass-produced glass container from the 1940s. 3 different time periods, all converging. And when Ethan lined up those dates, something clicked. They all pointed toward a single window, the early 1950s. It matched the timeline referenced in the decoded messages. Everything fit. The scroll itself was made of 6 pages, 3 sheets written on both sides. The writing was dense, rows of symbols, numbers, almost no spacing, just one continuous stream of text. Different sections used different encryption methods, but the first portion, that was simple, a direct letter substitution. Ethan cracked it in under an hour. The first decoded lines read, "A compilation of writings gathered over centuries is not the infallible word of God, but a constructed record shaped to support doctrine." Ethan paused, because in one sentence it summarized one of the most debated moments in religious history, a statement buried inside a scroll, hidden in a jar beneath a tree stump in the middle of nowhere. The next section used a modified alphabet. When decoded, it read, "Translated from the original Aramaic for the brother Elias for the Order of the Poor Knights." That name mattered, because the Poor Knights was the original title of the order later known as the Knights Templar. But then came the real breakthrough. That phrase, the Poor Knights, wasn't just text, it was the key. Victor was the one who noticed it. He realized that the first repeated word in each line acted as a marker, and the rest of the line formed the cipher phrase. Ethan counted the letters. 22. He stopped. That number again. The same number he had seen encoded in the Ravenstone tablet. The same symbolic signature. The rest of the scroll used a shifting cipher built around that 22-letter phrase, and once they began decoding it, the story took a turn neither of them expected. It opened with a reinterpretation of creation. A being referred to only as the Source creates humanity, but not for the first time. This wasn't the beginning.